Welcome everybody. It's
There.
past 7:30 and we've started the recording for Friday, March 7th. Uncle Pete's Corner, number 25. Thank you for coming. It's all yours, Pete.
All right. Morning, everyone. So today we're going to be looking at storing a list of values in a single database field. Happens quite often. I do a lot of projects with dynamic screens, user configurable screens. That's the type of thing that we're looking at today. In this particular instance, what we have is subject groups. This is a medical lab trial system.
Hey Pete, your
And
Skype keeps going off.
let me go shut that off.
Thank you.
So what we have in this system is a medical trial system, and the subjects have different groups they can belong in, like age references, you know, the teenager, preteen, 21 to 35, that sort of thing. Uh, Another group is sex, male, female. Uh, so these are in-user definable groups. So we have to provide a way for them to dynamically declare those groups and then display them on the screen, keeping a nice seamless interface so it looks like something that we designed from the beginning. So that's what we're looking at doing today. To do something like that, there's a lot of different options, and over my 30 plus years, I probably have done every one of those options. Uh, the option that comes to mind and is the most straight-laced way to do that is two database tables. You'd have a group table as your parent. You'd have a child table that would hold your available options for that particular group. Uh, Another option would be to store an array in the database. And then the option we're actually going to look at today is we're going to store a list of values as a comma separated string in one field in the database. Uh, like I said, there's a lot of different ways to do this. And every project's a little different. A lot of things affect that decision. What development environment you're using, what backend database you're using, the complexity of the data stored, the number of items you're storing, how often that data is going to be changed, how often it's going to be accessed, the size and complexity of the project, the number of end users. All these things can play into your decision of how you're going to accomplish this. Let's take a quick look at the two solutions that I mentioned that I'm not going to use. The first one is the more traditional, if you've got an academic on your team, someone that just got out of, with their 4-year degree, this is the solution they're going to want to use because, by golly, everything's supposed to be 100% normalized. This is, a perfect instance of a parent-child relationship. So we have our group table, we have our group value table. That's fine and wonderful. To me, in this instance, we're going to rarely store over 10 entries for any one group. And we're not going to have that many groups. That design just seems like a bit of overkill. I would have to do the management of adding extra records for each group value, and yada, yada, yada. It all could be done, but it just seems like a lot of infrastructure to support a very small feature. So I chose not to do that. It's one of those do as I say, not as I do type things. Yeah, academically, you should always be 100% normalized. I just feel that, after my 30 plus years of experience, I can decide when it makes sense to break that rule. The academic stuff is great and wonderful when you're in the classroom, but in the real world, we do whatever is most efficient and gets the job done. Storing an array in the database. Let me first say, a lot of back-end databases, absolutely, this isn't even an option to you. Many databases don't support an array as a column type. MS SQL sort of kind of does with table variables, but they're not really 100% the same thing as an array. Very complex. Every 10 MS SQL developers you meet, one of them may understand how to use table variables. So Hyperfile is one of the databases that does support storing in arrays, but there's some caveats to that. Because I do so many projects with so many different backends, code portability is always something I look at. And storing an array in your database is a sure way to get into code portability issues, for the simple fact so many databases aren't going to support them. And even if they do, each database vendor implements that support of arrays completely different because it's not a standard feature. So it's just something that's not that common. And if you think about it, why is that? Well, most databases can trace their origins to a university. Postgres was, I believe, came out of Berkeley. MS SQL got its origins in Sybase, which got its origins out of a university as well. Most of your database backends were originally developed by academics. We already discussed academics believe everything should be perfectly normalized. Arrays, by their very definition, break that rule, so you wouldn't expect academics to really think about that being a feature that needs to be supported. You're also going to run into some things with third-party tools, a lot of third-party tools. You're not going to know how to handle an array column. Even simple SQL statements can get complicated. But, I'll show you the few things I know about arrays in Hyperfile, just in case I haven't convinced you not to use them yet. This is the way our definition would look. We'd only have one table. We'd have the name, we'd have a value column, and we simply turn on array, and that makes this an arrayed column. Now, this is my issue with Hyperfile's implementation of arrays. It has to be in a fixed array. We have to declare the dimensions. So by putting a 10 in here, we're saying that there are 10 elements in the value array, which means that as soon as someone comes along and needs to store 11 values, our system no longer works without a database change. Because this is a fixed array, it can't grow, so nothing like that is supported. That's a bit of an issue to me. Now, you might say, well, I know I'm rarely going to use more than 10, so let's get stupid, make it 100. And that way we'll never run into that issue. Well, again, all that experience that I've got tells me somewhere, somehow, someone's going to come up with a reason to store 101. No matter what number I come up with, somewhere, somehow, somebody's going to break that number. The other thing is, it just seems silly to me that if most of our groups are only going to have 2 or 3 entries in them, declaring that dimension as 100 just really seems kind of silly. So that's my first knock on it. The other thing that this being in a fixed array does is it kind of gives me a hint as to how PCSoft implemented arrays in Hyperfile. And I am quite certain this is a gross oversimplification of what they've done. But for the most part, what they're really doing is when we put 10 there, they're just declaring 10 values. They're doing the same old school thing that we used to do. In fact, somebody on the list was talking about this not long ago, where they had monthly values and they had 12 values. Same type of thing. If I put a 10 here, what PCSoft is really doing under the covers is they're doing value 1, value 2, value 3, value 4. They're really declaring 10 columns. So it's very much the exact same thing as if you had declared those 10 columns yourself. They're just kind of doing some stuff under the covers to isolate you from that design so that you can use the standard array functions once you've read the data in. But in reality, all they're doing is storing the individual columns. Let's take a look at what this file looks like with WD map. Notice it's showing us the 10 columns. Once again, more or less proving exactly what I've been saying. What they're really doing is storing those 10 columns. This gets, again, talk about standard SQL statements. And just a second, as soon as I get this connected, I'll drag it over so you can see it. If we do a select asterisk from groups, it shows us the individual values. But what if I need to see if I do just values, I only see 1. If I need to see value 2, I use the standard, and this took me a little playing to figure this out, but you use the array syntax similar to what you would use in WinDev WX language. So to get to value 2, you would use the square bracket, element number, square bracket behind your statement. Same thing with an update. You would do update groups set values 2 equals 9. Oh, they don't like multiple statements. So the SQL gets a little clunky there. You may not really think so for the simple fact that you're used to that syntax if you work with arrays in WinDev code, but my issue is that definitely is not standardized SQL language there. So once again, any SQL statements, I'm going to run into code portability issues with them because that is not standard. So end of the day, I have yet to find a real strong, valid reason to use an array in my database. One of the other solutions always just makes more sense to me. It's a cool feature, great thought. It just scares me to hell, so I stay away from it. If you still want to use them, that's great, wonderful. Knock yourself out. Just don't come crying to me 6 months from now when one of those gotchas I showed you gets you. So now let's talk about the solution that we're actually going to look at today. And that is storing a comma-separated list as one field in the database. This is our actual database design. Before anyone asks, not my database originally, so not my naming convention. But where we're going to store those values is in this values column, and it's just a string 120. I happen to have it declared as 120 because, again, I know we're not storing many values, and they're short values. If you were storing tons of values, you could make this a memo field and let it grow as much as you want. But of course, my take on that is if you're storing that many values, then likely this isn't the right solution, and you should probably be looking at a parent-child relationship if you're storing a lot of values. Again, one of the reasons I chose this solution was because I knew I wasn't storing many values. So nothing special about the table design. It's just a string field. Let's look at the interface for a second of how the interface works. And if we come into library, global groups, here's a group I declared today. This area here is the interface that I'm using for adding values to the database table. We'll look at the interface, and then we'll jump over and look at the code behind the interface. This interface, you've seen it before. It's a bit old school. Again, this is in the medical lab area where a lot of these folks have been exposed to mainframe hospital data entry systems, that sort of thing. A couple of different ways this interface could be done. You probably could do it with just an edit and place table. It's just this interface seemed to make a little more sense for our audience. It's the type of interface where you've got your table of values here. If I select one of those table records, I can click change to change it. Notice the entry field up above shows whatever one I want. If I want to add a value, I simply type in unsure, because you got those pats that come in that you're just not sure if they're male or female. So you just type it in and click the add button, and it adds that. If we want to edit it, we simply click on it, and now it's edited. And we can remove it simply by clicking the remove button. So nothing real elaborate there. Like I said, you probably could do it with an edit and place table without this field. It's just that's what made more sense for this particular interface. And then we simply save it. Okay, so now let's go look at the code behind that interface. And the first thing we do is when on the initialization of the screen, we declare an array, valid values, as just an array of strings. Then we use one of those very cool WX functions called string to an array. What that does is takes a delimited string and stuffs it into an array. In this case, we're saying that database field GG values that we looked at that we're going to be storing this list in, take that and split it into individual array elements in the valid values array. And this is probably hard to read, but that's comma separated is what that is. That's declaring the separator. That's all there is to take a comma-separated list of values and stuff them into an array. One statement. That's one of the reasons that makes this such a no-brainer option to select is these kind of functions. You know, a lot of languages I would have had to write my own CSV parser to handle this. Not the case with WinDev. Now, before you get too excited about that string to array function, if you've followed my webinars and blogs, you know that that function does not handle Excel formatted CSV files properly. Excel formatted CSV files have quotes around strings so that you can embed a comma inside a string value. String to array does not support that. It doesn't know anything about those quotes. It just reads those in like they're another character. So if you've got a comma somewhere in there, it just sees that as a delimiter and now breaks your CSV file. So if you're trying to import CSV files that are likely to be that format, you've got to do the parsing yourself. And I've done a webinar and an article on that in the past, so you can see some tips and stuff on how to handle that in that article. In this instance, not a big deal for us because we actually have control over what we're putting in and out of this field, so we don't have to worry about that. So we're good. All right, so the next thing I did was I added this table control. Nothing fancy about this table control. It's got the one column valid values, and the source of this table control is that array that we just declared. All there is to the table control. The edit control, likewise, there's nothing fancy about it. It's not linked to anything. It's just a temporary editing area. So then on the buttons, the only thing I did on those is the change and remove buttons are grayed by default so that when you first open the screen, they are disabled by default. So now let's actually look at the code behind some of the buttons. The add button. First thing we do is we make sure that you've typed something into the edit field because we don't want to add blank entries into our array. No, I'm talking. You can't hear me, Arnold? Hello? Okay. Wolfgang says he can hear me, Arnold, so maybe it's your equipment. Okay. All right. Well, moving on. So we make sure that it's not blank because we don't want to add blank entries. And then we use the table seek function to make sure that the value isn't already in the table because we don't want to add duplicates. As long as those two values pass, we simply add a line to the table with the value that we entered, and then we execute the row selection code of the table control. What that code's going to do is have some logic that controls the, it populates the edit control and determines which buttons to enable and disable, and we'll look at that code here shortly. So all we do, as you saw, we typed in a value. So we've got a value. That value doesn't already exist in the table, so we add it to the table. Now notice I'm only adding it to the table control. I'm not adding it to the array. And you'll see why here shortly. But I don't need to add it to the array. I just need to add it to the table control. So the change button actually only has one line of code in it. All we do with the change is we change the value in the table to the value of the edit control. Nothing fancy there at all. And then the remove simply deletes the record from the table, deletes that line out of the table control, and then once again executes our selection code to reselect a record, disable, enable the buttons, that sort of thing. All right. I'm getting a message here. Okay. Looks like Arnold disconnected and reconnected. Hopefully everybody can still hear me. All right. Okay. I'm going to move on, assuming everything's still working. So that's our delete code. The only code we have left to look at behind the table control is that row selection code. So when you select a row of the table, which means you selected it by mouse, or those two areas where you saw I did the execute process code, in both of those instances, this code is going to fire. What it does is set the edit control to the value of the record that you've selected in the table, and then based on whether or not there is a value in that row, it enables or disables the delete and update buttons. So that's all the code of the interface. Last thing is on the OK button is this line of code right here. We set the database field, that GG values field out of the database, and we use another one of those cool WX functions called table to text. Table to text takes a table control and turns it into a delimited list. In this instance, I'm saying take the valid values table. I don't want column titles. I have several options here, and definitely table to text is a very cool function that you should look up in the help. It's got a lot of uses. You've got options there to have a column header row or not, to only export selected columns if you had multiple columns and someone had only had some of those columns hidden using the AAF functions. You have the choice of whether to export those columns or not. You also can have a multi-select table and only export the selected columns. In our instance, we just want everything that is in the table control, no column header, because again, we're in control of what we're exporting and importing, so we don't need that information. It's not going to an external source. The next field here is what is the column separator, and I've got an empty string there. I don't have any column separator. And then the next field is what is the line separator, and I'm saying that the line separator is a comma. Now, that may seem odd to you. You may have expected me to have a comma here and a carriage return here. But remember, what we're trying to get is this. Remember, this is one row in the table, this is a second row in the table. So what I'm telling it is, because I only have one column, I don't need any separators between columns. So it writes out the first column, then that's the end of that row. It writes out the next row, and I told it to do a comma at the end of the row, so it puts the comma. Then it writes out the next row. So I get male, comma, female on one line. If I'd done the more traditional comma, carriage return, I would have wound up with this. And actually, technically, if I remember right when I tested this, it's not smart enough to not put a comma behind that last row. So I think you actually wind up with that. So that's the reason that I'm doing an empty string for the column separator and a comma for the line separator. And that's it. At that point, we are storing our comma separated list in the table. We're pulling it back up when we edit a record. We've given the user interface to declare the valid values for a group. The only thing left for us to do is actually use that on the dynamic screen. And let's take a look at that in the interface real quick. And so take just a minute to connect. If anyone's got any questions, now would be a good time we can talk about what we've done so far while this is connecting to the database in the UK. Okay, so if we go over here to clinical trial subjects, and we edit one of these subjects, this particular subject has the age children group added to it. And here are the values for that group. So this is those valid values that we're entering into that field, and we're simply putting those into a combo box so that the user can select them. So this gives us a screen that is very end-user configurable and driven without us having to do any special coding. There's no hand coding, but it looks very much like a customized application.
Pete, I got a question.
Yep.
Yeah, so you get the four groups there. You get the unknown, 0, 6, 6 to 7 to 13, etc. So what if the administrator comes in and you have a whole bunch of records already, and all the records all have one of these four things in it? What if they go in there and they decide to make it like 0 to 5, 6 to 10, and add 5 groups, and now they don't match something that's saved for a record?
Yeah, well, that's not something that's allowable in this instance. Once groups are defined and used, they can't be edited for those very reasons. That's an area where
they can't experiment or anything. It has to be
right.
right on, right
Now
away.
right, child. And to be honest with you, you may think that the parent-child table definition would have been better for that, but not really, because I could go edit those child records and everything would still be linked up, but that doesn't mean that they're linked properly now, because if you change this to 0 to 5, well, I had a 6-year-old in that group. All you've done now is say he's in that 0 to 5 group. So, if you change the groups, no matter which design you use, you've invalidated your data and you got to clean your data up. So, I mean, that would be an issue no matter which of these designs you use. When you're grouping subjects, you can't change those groups on the fly and expect your data to still be valid.
I guess that's why you have birthdays and let it determine what group it's in, huh?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things here, and again, this is clinical trial software, so these groupings here are really about groupings for study results. This is how they determine this medicine shouldn't be used by anyone under the age of 6. Those sort of things. We've got groupings for for fasting or not. We've got groupings for diagnostic codes, different things like that. Again, it's for clinical trials. So
Okay.
anyway, there's our interface. Let's take a look at the code for that side of things. And this code, for the most part, should look very familiar. The first half of it is identical. We declare that array, same as we did before, valid values. And then we load that up. Now, loading up the valid values is a little more complex this time, but that's because of our design. First, we're using a query to determine which group this subject should belong into. And then I'm simply, once I've determined that group ID, I'm storing that on the record. I'm changing that caption of our combo box to that group. And again, just so you see, this is our combo box. And we're making it use that valid values array. And we're just displaying the values and storing the values. And it's actually linked to the database field that so global group value is actually stored in the database. So it's actually storing that string 0 to 5. It's not storing an ID, it's not storing a location, it's storing the actual value because that is what they're typing in. So I changed that caption, and that's the reason you saw age children over there instead of subject group the way the screen looks, is because I'm changing that caption based on the group that this subject belongs in. Then we use that same string to array function that we used before to take our values out of GG values and put them into an array. Then I use a little bit of extra trickery here, and I insert a new first element into that array with the value of unknown. And that's the reason you saw when I dropped down that combo list, the first option was unknown, even though we didn't make that an option when we declared this group. We always make the first option unknown on this screen so that it indicates that the value wasn't selected. Finally, I refresh that combo box so that the new array is displayed in that combo box. Excuse me. Then I use array seek to see if the value that's currently stored in the field, and this kind of gets to your question, Arnold, if you had went and changed those groups, this array seek function is now going to fail if it can't find that value in the list. If it can't find a value in the list, it's going to select that first option, unknown. Otherwise, it selects whatever option it matches, and that's how the screen shows the proper value when you first open up the combo box.
So Pete, I got another question.
Yes, sir.
So in the design of this array field or record, if you have multiple languages, I guess you would have another field to say we're doing English or French or Italian or German, and then it picks the right line. So that's kind of efficient too, isn't it?
Yeah, although the only reason you would have to deal with that is if you had one company with multiple languages. In other words, we're up to 6 languages that we support in this application now, but when it comes to the configuration side of things, all those companies that are using this are all one language. They're either speaking French or they're speaking German or they're speaking English. So again, this is end user configurable. So they're going to put in the values because they're declaring all this. They're defining these groups. So they declare those groups with the values that are in their language already.
Mm-hmm.
The only time you would have to deal with what you're talking about is if you had users with that spoke multiple languages. You know, if I was running a clinic and I had both French speaking and German speaking users using the system, then I would have to support that kind of feature. But that's something that we don't deal with. Each installation is a particular language.
Okay.
And that's the end of our code. We've looked at everything, so it's very simple to store. Uh, you know, again, it's just another tool in your toolbox to pull out when you need it. I've got a similar one in the voting that I use for some other instances. I use it more when I'm going to have multiple columns and I don't really know exactly what kind of data I'm going to store. I will store XML in a single field in the database. Uh, so that's yet another solution that I use for slightly different purposes in this solution. You know, if it's just a straight out list of values kind of thing, I'll use comma separated. More complex data, I'll move over to the XML solution. So that's another one that we'll look at in the future sometime.
So you can actually use the same user interface. It's just how you got your data and how you give it back, save it back, right? Could be
Right.
still the same. Okay. I'm sorry, Wolfgang, were you saying something?
Yeah. Just quickly, your question about wanting to change your pick list in midstream later down the line. Why would you want to do that? Is there a particular reason you want to do that?
For me? No, I'm just thinking that, you know, when people set up the program, sometimes
Arnold's just being difficult.
No, I've just seen where people just don't. Okay, I won't answer.
no, yeah, it's a valid question, and you know, again, we had to deal with it coding wise, you know, because obviously once you've set up a clinical trial, you can't change the parameters of that clinical trial.
Yeah, in your particular application, it works fine, but like in our industry, people change their opinion and mind in midstream, and they kind of change gears while they're running. So we also got a similar problem. I'm just asking why you're having that question, Arnold. But coming back to the problem that you want to change it, for example, later down the road. The way we've handled it, it might be a thing to look at if you need this kind of issue resolved. Is, for example, let's talk about age groups just for simplicity point of view. You've got a 1 to 6 and then 6 to 12 every 6 years. Let's divide it into 6 years just to make it easy to remember. So later down the line, they decide, no, we don't want to do it in every 6 years. We're going to do it every 8 years. Group the people. And the problem is that your database, like you already said, it gets out of sync. The way we've done it, we've defined those lookup tables, and we added a little extra field in. And that's a field which I just call date and time. So if it's blank, it is active. As soon as it's discontinued, if you hit the delete button, in your case, you delete, but we don't physically delete it. We don't. All we do is we add a date to it and filter it out. So if the date field is 0, we allow it to be picked list. You follow what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've done similar things in the past. Yeah.
Once the guy later on calls up, it will still show correctly for the guys who were subgrouped into 6 years age. It will still show it and be still correct. And we've got another little option in the option which says, hey, if it's expired, that means you're not allowed to use it anymore, force the user to update it or just leave as is. So next
If
time
they
he
open
goes
up
and
the
looks at it
record,
and he
right.
clicks OK, he looks back at the option and says, hey, but I mean, this one, you have to now recategorize a guy into the 6-year categories. Or alternatively, you can say, look, it's not serious. If they had in the past put it that way and leave it like that. But any new information, it has to be according to the new one. And that's how I
Yeah.
resolve mine.
Yeah,
But
I've had to do that in the past, and to do that with this system, you wouldn't have the inactive date because you're
I can
just
understand.
storing.
Because
But
medical,
when you're doing
medical
the table select right here, when you're doing this
Yeah.
array seek, you would simply say, hey, if I didn't find the value, that's where your option of either adding it to the list or popping up the, hey, you got to change the value.
Yeah, I will do one step further in your case where it says if it found it, if you have to force it to update it, then you would then default again to the first option, which says unknown. So
Right.
that the guy has to re-select it again. Alternatively, if you say it doesn't matter, leave it alone, it will just put it there. But when you do the drop-down list, it won't be there anymore.
Right.
As an option.
Right.
You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah. You would only add it. All you would have to do right here is do another array insert line right here, and then it would be in your combo for this instance. But as soon as you come into another record, it wouldn't be there again. So yeah, you could implement, and that would be a good way to implement a solution similar to what you're talking about, Arnold.
And you know what? I'd probably make it red too. You know, to note that it's not.
Yeah, and you can do a lot of those things with WX very quickly and easily. So, you can actually do strike through for the font. You know, a lot of little tricks that you could do.
Yeah,
good ideas.
Yeah, like I said, in our instance, we don't have to deal with that because, if you change the groups once you've started your trial, you've invalidated the entire clinical trial.
We don't want to do
that. Because in clinical fields, they're very rigid with their way of data. Once it's accepted, you're not allowed to
Yeah, I've used other terms for them.
Tough bananas.
Now, like our industry, the guys tend to start with one thing, and I think this is a great idea. Then 6 months down the line, they find it's not working, and then they want to change it. And that's how we allow it to do it.
Yeah, and that exactly is what I was talking about at the beginning. That those are the exact things that you have to think about when you come up with what solution is going to make sense for you. Yeah. Your design has to take those kind of things into play. Like you were talking about, you do the inactive field. Well, to do that, you almost have to do a child parent type of table so that you can carry that inactive field around. So, that would be more likely the type of design you would go to so that you could support that type of feature.
Yeah, because I would have another little field which has got the date in, which the way you've done it, it doesn't work. Because you just store a single field.
Right.
Single value, basically. And that's quite easy. Then you just do comment and limit it all the way.
Right. So, again, that's the reason, you should really think about, those kind of parameters when you decide, again, the pure academic standpoint would have you always doing it one way. You come out of college thinking that there's only one way to design a database, one way to do an algorithm, but in the real world, that's not the case.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Thank you.
Other things would affect it.
Yep. Any other questions?
Nope. Thank you. Perfect insight again.
All right.
Who would have known you could talk this long about this topic? Wow.
I can talk this long about any topic. Just try me.
Okay. I'll remember that. Okay. Anyway, thank you again, Uncle Pete.
Remember, if you drag it out too long, it gets also boring, eh?
What do we get coming up next week, Arnold? You know yet?
I think Tim was going to come up with somebody.
Exciting.
Yeah, because we're just having.
I'm happy to see some new folks getting involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff and I spoke this week, and he he did as I said. You know, he when he was preparing for his, he found a piece of code that he corrected and made better as he was preparing for his webinar. You know, like, you know, that's one of the things I almost always do when I'm preparing for mine. You know, it's like forcing yourself to go through a code review.
Oh, you know what else is right after the webinar? He says, by the way, I have a follow-up topic.
Yeah, and you know, he had, what he was talking to me about was, you know, it was a different atmosphere for him. Doing webinars is very different than speaking in a room, because you know, you kind of feel like you're sitting in a room talking to yourself. But you know, that's something that after you do a couple of them, you get over. So you know, I strongly encourage everyone to do it.
Give it a go, as they say.
Great fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So you guys all have a great weekend, and Uncle Pete, thanks again. And we'll see you
no problem.
on the third Friday. Unless we get into a jam next week. No, I'm only kidding. We'll find something. Okay, take care.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.